family mode.
Hello and welcome to today's APBP webinar. This is being sponsored today by the group People for Bikes and the Green Lane Project, and we're delighted to have an opportunity to bring this information to you. My name is Kit Keller. I'm Executive Director of the Association of Pedestrian and Bicycle Professionals. This is the second in a series of webinars on green lanes and protected lanes, and you will find other previous webinars in the series available through the APBP website and through the generosity of the people at People for Bikes and the Green Lane Project. This webinar series is being offered at no charge to APBP members and to Green Lane communities. So again, our thanks to the Green Lane Project and People for Bikes. Just a quick reminder that we have applied for continuing education credit for today's webinar. And if you are interested in receiving credit, be sure if you're attending at a site with other people, make sure that the host of the site has a sign-in sheet and you get to sign it, because we'll need to have that back in order to comply with the requirements for continuing education. You can also download a certificate of attendance at the link here, and I believe that will be sent out to you as well after the webinar. So be sure to add these additional trainings on the Green Lane Protected Lane program October 1st and December 3rd at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. For those of you who are new to APBP webinars, welcome. We're glad that you've attended and joined us today. We also run a monthly webinar program that gives people an opportunity to be able to meet with others, ideally bringing together other colleagues in your community to learn about particular topics and advance those ideas in your locale. On August the 20th, we will continue with our monthly program, and the topic is Transform Bicycling and Walking Outside the Urban Context. So many of those topics are of interest to people, and we're excited about being able to present that to you. So without further ado, let's move directly into our webinar today. It's my pleasure to present our qualified and respected presenters, Nick Falbo, who is Senior Planner at Alta Planning and Design, and Nathan Roseberry, Senior Transportation Engineer at T.Y. Lin in Chicago. And we'll be hearing briefly from Martha Ruskowski, who is the Green Lane Project Director at People for Bikes, and I will welcome her in just a moment. I'm not going to read the bios of our presenters. I'm showing them on the slide so that you can have a moment to take a look. Very interesting to know that prior to entering the planning profession, Nick was a 3D artist and animator. So that has come in very handy, he has said, in communicating concepts and ideas. And he will do that brilliantly for us today. Nate Roseberry is based in Chicago, and one of the interesting things about his work is that he is actually on contract full-time with the City of Chicago Department of Transportation. All right. So with that, Martha, I will go ahead and invite you to set the stage for us today.
Fabulous. Thank you, Kit, and thanks to APBP for hosting this series of webinars. As Kit said, I run the Green Lane Project. It's an effort of People for Bikes. We are a national nonprofit based in Boulder. Our effort is all about helping to get protected bike lanes on the ground in the United States. So taking this European innovation and helping to translate it to this country. So we talk about a protected bike lane. They're also sometimes called cycle tracks, but I think protected bike lane is emerging as the term that we use in the sort of in the more non-technical world. The definition of it is a bike lane with some kind of physical separation between people on bikes and moving cars, so posts, parked cars, planters, It is exclusively for people on bikes, so it is not a mixed-use pathway. It is a space for bikes, and it's on or adjacent to the roadway. So some of them are street level, some of them are sidewalk level. So that's just the definition piece. Green Lane Project is working really closely with 6 leading cities to help get them get good projects on the ground. So we're currently working with Boston, Pittsburgh, Atlanta, Indianapolis, Denver, and Seattle. That's our second round of cities. We provide them with some grants, some technical assistance, study tours, trainings, because we need cities to be able to build these so that we can learn from them. We also help to instigate the new study from Portland State University called Lessons from the Green Lane, which looked at 8 projects in 5 cities. So the research is slowly catching up with these new designs. We have a blog that shares some of the latest information about these projects. greenlaneproject.org is the place to go to find all of that. So there's been a lot of progress across the country. There were 25 protected bike lanes on the ground in 2007. There are 160 projects on the ground today, and we estimate there will be 200 on the ground by the end of this year. They're either built or being planned in 66 cities in 36 states, so there's a pretty wide reach. We've seen this growing support for encouraging bikes coming from mayors, from city leaders, and others for a variety of reasons. And collectively, it's put a lot of pressure on the engineering community to figure these designs out, how to design them to be safe and to function well. So the conversation has moved from whether we should be building these to how do we build them and design them. So we have been partnering with NACTO on the Urban Bikeway Design Guide, Federal Highways that will be releasing new design recommendations for protected lanes in September. And here we are with APBP. We're hosting these webinars to take some of these really good conversations around this rapidly evolving design and share them more widely. So intersections are the crux of these projects. We need to get intersections right. We are figuring them out. And I'm really happy to have Nate on the call because Chicago has more experience in getting these projects on the ground in the last few years than any other city, and they've learned a lot about how to do intersections really well. And Nick's design, it's sort of, he's working in the big ideas area, how we adapt really elegant and sophisticated design from the Netherlands into the U.S. context. So thanks you guys for being here. Happy to be part of this.
Thank you, Martha, for setting the stage for us. And now I'm going to transfer the slides to our first presenter, who is Nathan Roseberry. So Nate, you should be seeing a show my screen note.
Great. Thanks, Kit. Thanks, Martha. Just want to make sure everyone can see my presentation.
Yeah, currently we see a black screen. We know there are things hiding behind that screen.
Okay.
I think you were fine, Nate. I could see it. I can see your screen now.
Great.
Okay, very well. Great.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Kit and Martha, for setting the stage. Once again, my name is Nathan Roseberry. I'm a Senior Transportation Engineer at TY Lin. My primary role is actually as the Senior Bikeways Engineer at the Chicago Department of Transportation. And I'm going to walk you through some of the lessons we've learned installing protected bicycle lanes in the city of Chicago for the last 3 years, and set the stage for some of the concepts that Nick's going to take a little bit further with more advanced designs. So a little bit of background on the city of Chicago. Prior to 2011, we actually did not have a single mile of cycle track or buffered bike lane in the city. We had a pretty good network of bike lanes and shared lanes, but nothing providing that separation. And as of this month, the network has really grown. We're up to 60 miles installed of cycle tracks or buffered bike lanes, and we actually have another 60 miles currently in design to be installed either later this year or early next year. So we're working through a lot of different projects. In addition to that, we've seen a lot of a lot more bicycle riders on our street with a lot of different skill levels, and this has been partly because of the fact we had Divvy, our bike share program, released last year, and to date we've hit some pretty amazing milestones for miles traveled, annual members, and trips taken, which you can see is growing, and it's amazing to see this grow every month. It just seems to keep going up and up and up. So from a technical perspective, this presentation does draw from a few different manuals. The NACDO, Martha mentioned that earlier, the NACDO Urban Bikeway Design Guide is a great design guide. I recommend you take a look at it. It's free online. We'll also be drawing from the AASHTO materials, both the bike design guide and some of the green book, the geometric design. Our design's actually been vetted local in Chicago through those manuals, because those are critical for a lot of roadway designers, and also, of course, the manual and uniform traffic control devices for all of our markings and signage. So first off, I want to kind of walk through, generally speaking, what I think is most important when you're looking through designing intersections for bicyclists, and I think it's really that bicycle position and conflicting turns. And then I'm going to walk you through 3 different types of designs we've installed in the city of Chicago and what went into those designs. So first off, the METCD has some good guidance on handling conflicting turns and bicycle position as you get to an intersection for bike lanes. And as you can see on both of these images on the left, the bicyclist actually keeps a straight path through, and the right turns merge across the bike. And this is good because a lot of times at intersections, what we're trying to do is mitigate those right hook conflicts, where a bike is on the right-hand side of a turning vehicle outside of the view of that turn, and that's where a crash can happen. So moving that conflict upstream and mitigating that conflict is a good idea. Unfortunately, one of the things we've seen is with curbside bike lanes, which is very typical to protected bike lanes, this can cause issues. Trying to force this design, force the METCD concept on a curbside bike lane can actually create a situation where you end up with what I call a double weave, where bikes have to weave left and right turns have to weave right. And that asks a lot of the users. And that's an uncomfortable situation for bikes. They have to look over their shoulder and merge and also look for right turns. And I think all it's doing is really just moving the conflict up, not really addressing the conflict. So with that in mind, what I see is the intersection design goals for protected bike lanes. All intersections, we really need to understand our traffic speeds, our volumes, and our visibility. Those are really very critical components to all intersections. They hold true for protected bike lanes as well. I see that, as I mentioned, that double weave concept, I really think that's something important to think about when designing comfortable protected bicycle intersections. In addition to that, I think keeping the bike curbside or as close to curbside as possible is really something that makes it much more comfortable for a larger population of cyclists. And then doing that, making sure to mitigate those turn conflicts at or near the intersection to create safe and comfortable designs. As you see on here, on-street parking is definitely something that is very common in a lot of cities, and a lot of times when we do protected bike lanes, we're shifting that parking out. And it's hard to balance the needs for parking demand with bikes design. So coming up with designs that minimize parking impacts, I think, is a goal as well. So the first type of intersection design is something I call the side street stop or a driveway treatment. And as you can see here, bikes are kept curbside. They have the right-of-way. There is no traffic control stopping the bike. Turning vehicles are to yield to bikes, and I think this results in a very comfortable facility for bikes. Some of the geometrics of it, looking through this, this design really is very important when you have on-street parking or something physical in the roadway that would obstruct visibility. So it's important to pull that back a sufficient distance to really open up those view angles. And if you look at the AASHTO Green Book, there really isn't much guidance for right turn from major, which is the movement that controls for visibility. So what we've done here is we've used some criteria on stopping sight distance based on some of our understandings on how drivers use driveways and intersections. So what we use is we use 10-mile-per-hour stopping side distance for driveways. This is based on the fact that most driveways are designed to accommodate a vehicle turning around 10 miles per hour. And we use 15-mile-per-hour stopping side distance at intersections because that actually does a good job mimicking, in the state of Illinois, we have requirements where parking is pulled back 20 feet from crosswalk. That opens up a view angle of about 15-mile-per-hour stopping side distance, so it mimics that same situation for bikes. So you can see here what that results in is you end up pulling the parking back about 30 to 60 feet, depending on that stopping side distance number you utilize. This example shows an intersection, so the parking is pulled 60 feet back from that face of curb on the intersecting roadway, because really, as we're measuring this, it's really where the vehicles turn. And as you can see here, we've used these flexible delineators, or the posts, to help reinforce those speeds to make sure that cars can't cut the corner too quick, and really to reinforce that slower turning speed. You know, ideally in the future, this would be a situation where we could come back in and put some concrete in here to really reinforce that turn speed. In addition to that, you can also use some signage and striping to help reinforce that right-of-way. And you'll see here, this is actually a driveway treatment. What we've done is we've installed a sign helping to reinforce that turning vehicles are to yield to bikes, and also installed some intersection markings, some dashed white lines, and some green pavement markings, really to highlight the fact that that's a location where you'll see the conflict between bikes and turns. The second type of intersection design I'd like to present is something we call a mixing zone. And this is something you'll see now that we're getting to a point where we have signalized intersections or a lot heavier right turn volumes. Also, with the signal, bikes are expected to stop at a red light. They don't always have the right-of-way here. So the concept here is really to create a space that's slow in speed, shared space, encouraging single-file travel. You'll notice here the parking is pulled back a little bit further than the last concept I showed. Typically speaking, it results in about 150 to 200 feet of pulling back the parking from the stop bar. Some of the geometry of mixing zones. In the city of Chicago, our design is based on a 30-mile-per-hour vehicle speed. As speeds go up, that's something you really want to pay attention to. And mixing zones work well at slower speed environment. So if you get to much higher speeds, mixing zones may be more difficult to implement. But the AASHTO Green Book does call out that you can accommodate up to 10-mile-per-hour deceleration in the through lane. So what we're doing is we're accounting for the fact that the driver, as they enter the right turn mixing zone, will start their deceleration before they hit the turn lane. And then the geometry of it is set up for a 1 to 7 taper, which is based on a 20-mile-per-hour speed. And then the storage up near the stop bar varies depending on capacity analysis. Our minimum is 50 feet based on 2 vehicles out of the AASHTO guidance. And the lane is striped at 14 feet to allow for shared space. So if a right turn and a bike get there at the same time, they have enough space to be side by side. But by the point of the intersection, we encourage more of a single file path to get the bikes where they're not shadowed on the right side of the right turn. Oops. So a little bit more on the mixing zones. A couple things we've done is actually installing posts in that striped out area between the through lane and the right turn lane. Ideally, that would be concrete and more of a permanent situation. You really want to make sure people don't turn right out of the through lane, because that's where they would be. That's where a bike would be kind of hidden behind the turn, and that also does help to encourage the vehicle to slow as they approach the mixing zone. As you see the markings, we've gone with a right turn and a yield legend, really reinforcing the fact that it's a shared space. And we try to position the shared lane markings and the right turn markings in a single file path to really encourage the bicyclists to come out just a little bit and be single file with the right turns. And in the intersection, you can see the intersection markings are kind of kinked a little bit to the left, further reinforcing the fact that we want the cyclists to come a little bit away from the curb and form a single file path. We have also done mixing zones on streets without parking. It's not quite as critical here because visibility is not an issue. But really what you're looking at here is with protected bike lanes without parking, what we see is actually that width does a pretty good job shadowing right turn lanes, because if you have, let's say, a 7-foot bike lane and a 3-foot buffer, that can actually turn into a 10-foot right turn lane at an intersection if you have a location that has a high volume of right turns. And another thing we've done, it's kind of a nice subtle trick, is if you do have enough space, you can actually allow this position the cyclist a little bit further left in advance of the right turn lane, helping to separate those decision points. So as the cyclist approaches, they shift slightly left, and then they have a straight line path through the right turn lane, and the right turns mix across, separating those weaves. The final type of intersection design I want to run through is actually something we call signal separation, and this is where we actually take a bike lane all the way up to an intersection and actually have it adjacent to a turn lane. This photo you see here is Dearborn Street through the loop of the city of Chicago, and actually it's on the left side of the street because it's a one-way street here, so we have that opportunity. So if this was mirrored and on the right-hand side, you'd have conflicting turns to the right. The general principles still hold true, that you're really trying to manage those conflicting turns. But I do, one thing to note is if you're looking at a two-way cycle track, I highly recommend really limiting those to streets that are one-way in nature. Doing a two-way cycle track on a two-way street, there are just a lot of conflict points at intersections. It can be done, but it gets a lot more complicated with the traffic phasing and the signalization. But if you do this right, it actually can result in a really comfortable facility for bikes where they are completely separated from conflicts from turns. One of the critical components of this project was installing actually dedicated bicycle signals. And Nick's going to touch on this a little later. These are actually brand new elements that you can utilize with your design. They just got interim approval less than a year ago. And this is based on the fact there's been a lot of good studies throughout the United States of localities, Chicago was included, there's other cities that have done them, where they've seen that these have really done a good job eliminating conflicts between turns and bikes, allowing for increased safety, and also increasing cyclist compliance. We did some before and after analysis looking at cyclist compliance with bike signals, and we noticed that from before to after, the cyclist compliance went up from 30 to 90%, really with not much education or enforcement, just with the bicycle signals. Some of the technical elements, and this slide actually is directly out of the NACTO guidance. They do a great job really outlining all the critical components for designing bicycle signals and other components. First and foremost, I think it's important to have 2 signal faces per movement, and one of those needs to be far side. So if you're installing bike signals, at least one needs to be far side. You can put both of them far side, but if you don't have the room, one of them can be near side. And I do recommend using 12-inch lenses for far side. There is some guidance in the METCD that allows you to go down to 8 inches. I don't recommend it. I think if you have the budget, using a larger lens is really a good idea. On the near side, you do see that the signal is a little bit lower and smaller. That's a trick that some places have used, where they actually use 4-inch lenses, and it is allowed in the METCD as an option. And I also recommend going to protected only vehicle turns. This does a really good job eliminating that conflict between bikes and turns, and it also can do a good job if you have a crash pattern between turns and pedestrians, maybe in a downtown environment where you have a lot of pedestrians. It can help increase safety with that. And also what we've seen in the loop is actually we have slightly better capacity because there's so many pedestrians crossing the street that turns that hard turn going. So providing that protected phase actually helps a little with capacity. As I've mentioned in the other solutions, if you do have on-street parking and that's part of your protection, there will be some impacts to parking to install these left turn lanes or right turn lanes and the dedicated phasing. What we found in the loop is, typically speaking, our parking is set back about 30 feet from stop bars, That's a city ordinance. To put in these left turn lanes, we need to pull back parking about 100 to 150 feet. And how we got away with that is we did a pretty short taper and storage, knowing that in the peak period, traffic volumes are heavy and people are going slower, so that they're able to merge over in a shorter distance. But in an uncongested time, we still have that full taper distance from the entry to the stop bar to allow someone to fully merge over. Finally, I wanted to kind of walk you through a typical phasing, which we used when installing these dedicated bike lanes with the bike signals up to the intersection. What we've done is actually we've recommended going to lagging turns, partially because of the concept of really allowing pedestrians to go first and having turns go last to mitigate those conflicts. It also works well with bikes. So as it works is this is looking north on Dearborn at the intersection of Wacker. Wacker is a two-way street. Dearborn is obviously a one-way northbound. So the first phase is northbound throughs. Northbound rights get a green ball. Northbound lefts are held on a red arrow. And northbound and southbound bikes also get a green ball. You'll also note that the pedestrians on the east and west leg of the intersection go. The second phase is a bicycle clearance. So northbound throughs and rights still have their green ball. The bikes are cleared with a yellow and a red phase, and the pedestrians on the left leg of this intersection are also cleared. That's followed up by a lagging turn phase. So at this point, northbound throughs, northbound rights, and northbound lefts all have green indications, and the pedestrians on the right leg of the intersection still get to cross. And finally, we wrap up with a vehicle clearance. So providing the yellow indication in advance of the red indication for the vehicles before the cross street gets the green light. And I know that there's a lot of questions. I've tried to go through some of them, or try to incorporate some of them into the presentation, but I think we'll have time afterwards to answer some. And with that, I'll actually turn it back to Kit.
Well, thank you so much, Nate. That was a great presentation. And while we're queuing up for Nick to be the next presenter, I'd like to go ahead and launch a poll, actually, just to see how many people are watching at your site. We are currently at about 180 some attendees, and we had more than 200 registrations, but it would really help to see how many people are watching at your site. So you'll see that poll is in progress, and in just a moment I'll close it and show the results, and then we will continue on with the presentations. I would like to mention that Nick's presentation will have a few changes in it. So we are going to, from what we had sent out earlier as the PDF of the presentation. So we'll be sending that out to you afterwards. And with that, I will go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And in just a moment then, we'll go ahead and switch over to Nick. So Nick, the controls are now coming to you, and let me know if you have any questions about that. So I'll go ahead and hide that poll, and now Nick, you should see the controls coming to you.
All right, it looks like I've got my controls. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, actually we're seeing both of your dual screens right now.
Oh, apologies for that.
Okay.
Monitor 1 or 2? 2.
It's kind of like seeing the both the control room and the slides at the same time. There we go. That's good.
Is this changed? No, now it's just the presentation?
It's perfect. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Kit. Thank you, Nate, for a great presentation. My name is Nick Falbo. I'm a senior planner at Alta Planning and Design here in the Portland, Oregon office. Alta is a leading firm in the design of protected bike lanes, and we've worked in some of the best bike cities all across the country. At Alta, I work on a diverse set of projects from safe routes to school to complete streets, but one of the things that I specialize in is on-street bikeway design. I contributed to and illustrated the NACTO Urban Bikeway Design Guide, and I'm really excited to be here today sharing some new ideas with APBP. Today's presentation will introduce a potential new treatment for handling protected bike lane crossings, designed to increase the comfort, appeal, and I hope the safety of our bikeways at intersections. The concept is based on practices that are common in the Netherlands, but not as common here in the US. To play off the protected bike lane name, I've nicknamed it the protected intersection. Now, I want to start with a disclaimer. The design I'm presenting, it hasn't been built in the US. As far as I know, there's only one installation in North America. So the design is untested here, and there's limited supporting research and evidence as to what works and what doesn't. So there's a lot more to figure out. In the presentation today, I'm going to make a brief case for the need for the new treatment, break down the elements of the design, and explore the ways that U.S. designers are already putting these elements into practice. And then I'm going to finish with a discussion of some of the potential challenges and issues that I've heard about so far related to the design. Nathan's presentation, I think, was a fantastic overview of the current practices at protected bike lane intersections. The work done in Chicago and other leading U.S. bike cities are spelled out in the NACTO Urban Bikeway Design Guide. And it offers a variety of different treatments to use in response to different context and intersection configurations. The general approach for designing bikeways at intersections can be classified into four main strategies. There's increasing awareness of potential conflicts through colored pavement, markings, and signs, increasing the conspicuity of bicyclists by positioning them in highly visible locations, isolating conflicts so that they can be negotiated separately from the intersection itself, and clearly assigning priority to users through signals, markings, and geometry. The current suite of protected bike lane intersection designs do this, and they do it well. The experience so far shows us these are safe facilities. But I want to add one more strategy that I think we should employ in our designs: maintaining bikeway comfort, so that the trip through the intersection is as comfortable as the trip to the intersection. There is some indication that our current designs don't go far enough in this area. A recent research report completed by OTREC at Portland State University, working with the Green Lane Project, conducted a large-scale survey and analysis of the various intersection treatments employed on U.S. protected bike lanes. And while I'm still diving in on the results and the implications of this study, one data point in particular caught my eye. The survey asked bikeway users to agree or disagree with the following statement: "I generally feel safe when cycling through the intersection." For the intersection designs that involved mixing or weaving between bikes and cars, the spread was about 60 to 80% in agreement with that statement. But for the intersection designs that maintained physical separation and used signals to control conflicts, the respondents had 92% agreement. So to maximize user comfort, and by extension I think ridership, I think we need to do better than 70% on our intersection designs. And maybe we need a new tool. In the same way that the physical protection has increased the comfort of our bike lanes, I wonder whether physical protection at intersections can do the same for our bikeway crossings. In the Netherlands, there's a potential solution that we could maybe adapt for use in the United States. And we're going to go through this design in detail, but you can instantly see some of the defining attributes right away. The bikeway crossing is set back from the through lanes of the roadway, and there's channelizing islands that separate bikes from cars. This is the opposite side of that same intersection. So much of the following section is based off of a video pitch I prepared a few months ago to share the concept. If you've seen the video, you'll be familiar with the ideas already. The video format, I think, allows for a rich visual explanation of how the concept works in a way that this sort of still frame presentation doesn't quite do as well, but I'll do my best at trying to explain it all. If you're interested in learning more about the design or if you want to share it with others, I encourage you to check it out at protectedintersection.com. There are 4 main elements that all work together in concert to create a safe, comfortable experience for bicyclists in this design. There's a corner refuge island to bring a barrier into the intersection and to slow driver turning speeds. There's a forward stop bar for bicyclists to put people biking in a visible location. There's a setback bicycle crossing to give users time to yield and react. And there's bicycle-friendly signal phasing to manage or prevent conflict. The corner refuge island is the element that ties everything together. This island brings the protective barrier from the bike lane far into the intersection. It physically separates bicyclists as they make right turns and provides a secure refuge for those waiting at a red signal, protected from moving cars. Paired with the corner refuge island is a forward stop bar for bicyclists. While people driving must stop back there at the bottom of the screen behind the crosswalk, people on bikes may yield to pedestrians and stop ahead at the bicycle waiting area. Bicyclists turning left also use this space to wait when making a left turn, very similar to a conventional 2-stage turn box. The forward stop location makes bicyclists incredibly visible to drivers when they're waiting at a red light. And the physical distance ahead of cars gives bicyclists an effective head start when the light turns green. And the distance of the road that bicyclists need to cross is greatly reduced. It's worth noting that the stop bar separation is significant. A bike box, which also provides a different stop bar for bicyclists than from cars, provides about 14 feet of difference, 14 feet ahead of the cars. In this design, it's closer to 35 feet ahead. In the protected intersection design, the bike lane bends away from the intersection, creating a setback bicycle and pedestrian crossing. In contrast to a conventional bike lane that runs next to moving cars, the setback crossing provides the space and time for everyone to react to potential conflicts. The critical dimension to provide is 1 car length of space between the traffic lane and the bicycle crossing, and this is around 6 meters. This space is often already present in the parking and buffer space of the protected bike lane. With this design, drivers turn 90 degrees to face the bike lane before they cross, making people on bikes highly visible and out of the driver's blind spot. And it's really critical here to encourage a really slow turning speed in these corners. And so you want a really tight, small, effective corner radius. The ideal turning speed would be close to bicycle speeds, 5 to 10 miles an hour. And finally, just as important as the physical design of the intersection is the use of signals to control how and when different people can proceed. Now, it may be possible to operate this intersection with conventional circular and arrow traffic signals, but where possible, I think it's worth enhancing the experience with bicyclist-specific signals and bicycle-friendly signal phasing. At its most secure, a protected signal phase for bicyclists will use a red signal to prevent any conflicting car turning movements. There is no risk of right or left hooks from cars when they are prohibited from turning while bicyclists are traveling through. This requires exclusive turn lanes for all desired movements so that they can be controlled independently. A variation of the protected signal phase is to give all car movements a red signal and all bicyclist movements a green. The simultaneous green phase gives full reign of the intersection to bicyclists, allowing through movements in all directions at once, left turns in one stage, and even full U-turns through the intersection. I'm convinced that even at high volumes, bicyclists are good at negotiating shared space and will have no trouble staying out of each other's way. And when it's not possible to prohibit conflicting movements entirely, an alternate approach is to provide a leading bicycle interval. This is a head start green light for bikes of anywhere from 2 to 5 seconds, and it just provides a little bit of extra room to get rolling and enter the intersection, and maybe even clear it completely before people driving start to move. Now, because we've got this forward stop bar configuration built into the geometry, a leading bicycle interval may not be as useful than it would otherwise be at a conventional intersection design. You might be able to get a similar result out of just a regular circular green indication. So when used together, these elements create a comfortable, safe experience for bicyclists crossing or turning within the protected bike lanes. I think these elements have the potential to fill a gap in our bikeway toolbox, allowing us to create crossings that are both safe and low stress. Now, I wanted to offer a brief note about the history of the design. As I was doing some digging into existing guidance related to it, it turns out that there have been at least some American bikeway engineers that have known about the design for over 40 years. The 1972 Institute of Transportation and Traffic Engineering at UCLA released bikeway planning criteria and guidelines on behalf of the state of California, and they identified this intersection treatment as something that they had seen in Germany and called it the recommended intersection design for intersecting arterial roads with bikeways on each road. That same year, there's a more localized report prepared for the city of Davis that also identified this design. The Davis study reflected on the design a little bit more, and it noted that because bicyclists had to deflect from a straight path, very unconventional for American bicyclists, it said experimentation with these designs is necessary to determine their safety and effectiveness under North American traffic conditions. But apparently, the experimentation never happened, and the idea was forgotten. Subsequent international scans since the mid-90s have visited the Netherlands, and in their reports back, they hadn't fully conceptualized this protected intersection design. They've only called out certain elements of it, but never really pulled it all together in one design. So the big question that everyone's got is, can we build this in the US? And in some ways, we already have. All of the elements themselves are already in use today in some form. Bike signals have become more common tools for managing bikeway conflicts. Forward stop bars are a useful tool in the bicycle boulevard crossing toolbox for increasing the conspicuity and to shorten crossing distances for bicyclists. Slow speed setback crossings are the standard design for crosswalks and modern roundabouts. Pedestrian refuge islands are used in protected bike lane buffer zones to protect users and shorten crossing distances. And corner refuge islands align, channelize, and protect bicyclists at crossings. At this point, I think all it's going to take is for a bold jurisdiction to pull all the pieces together. So I want to talk about the potential design and implementation challenges that have been brought to my attention. The list is longer than this, but these are some of the big ones. And I wanted to briefly talk about them and discuss some potential solutions to try to move this design forward. Large vehicle turning is probably the most called out issue. It's by far the #1 comment I've received. It says basically this won't work. We've got large trucks, they need big radius. How's this gonna happen? And it's true. You know, if you look at this drawing, this is a turning template laid on top of a protected intersection diagram. And it looks like a problem. The truck is crossing directly over the location where the corner refuge island needs to be. So how do we resolve this? Now, first, it might not actually be an issue after all. The requirement for a small turning radius is there for when you have permitted conflicts, permitted turns, and you're trying to encourage slow speed turns. If you actually have signalization and you can manage your conflict through signals, then the turning radius doesn't really matter. That island is there to provide comfort for the users, not as much to manage speed. Second, I think it's important to remember that truck accommodation is a policy decision. Policies can determine which routes are truck routes and which are not. And policies can determine what the standard design vehicle is for a route. And policies can bring flexibility to the way you design and accommodate large vehicles. This is a pretty typical intersection design designed for a large vehicle. You can see it turns from its own lane into its receiving lane on the cross street and encroaches a little bit on the bike lane. And there's a nice wide 40-foot corner radius to make the turn easy. But if this was not, if this was like a pedestrian-oriented area or a bike-oriented area where you might want to use the protected intersection design, that 40-foot corner radius isn't going to cut it. It's much too large, and it results in turning speeds that are too high for comfortable walking and biking. In those areas, perhaps a 15-foot corner radius is more appropriate. And it's absolutely possible. In cities with sophisticated truck policies, they have multiple levels of large vehicle accommodation. It's possible to accommodate that same large truck through that same intersection, even with a 15-foot corner radius. Now, the truck operator has to do some amazing physical gymnastics to make this work. They have to use the adjacent lane. They have to occupy the full intersection in the cross street, and but it's possible, and that's the important thing. This is an important design detail, that if your large vehicles are an infrequent user and bicyclists and pedestrians are prioritized, then policies that actually allow this type of accommodation are a good practice. But if policies fail you, I think there's a geometric solution. Truck aprons allow you to design two separate turn radii, one for passenger cars and one for trucks. This is a common design feature in roundabouts on the central island, where trucks can mount and traverse the apron as necessary to make the turn. The passenger cars stay off the apron and remain in circular roadway. The same design has been applied in channelized turn lanes and can be used at corners to effectively create two different curb radii. Snow removal and maintenance. This is the next question I get from engineers, is how do we keep it clean? Most commonly I get this from people who are in cities that don't have protected bike lanes themselves. And in general, if you have a protected bike lane and you have a way to keep that clear, then you should be able to clean out these protected intersection designs, no problem. This is a photo from Vancouver. They've got a small street sweeper designed to keep it clean. It's also important to note that the only place in North America that uses this design, it's in Montreal, which is a snow city. It's a winter city. And they've designed it with these removable bollards. So you've got their corner refuge island and these curb extension pedestrian islands, but it's temporary. It's not very pretty, but it works, and they can pull these up in the winter and clear those out. Signalization is also another issue. Since the FHWA interim approval from December 2013, signals are now an approved traffic control device, but there are some restrictions on its use. The interim approval is very strict in the requirement for protected-only operation. Permitted conflicts are not allowed when using a green bicycle signal face. This has caused some problems when trying to implement a leading bicycle interval as I've described it, or even a simultaneous green phase, because bicyclists are conflicting with each other. It may be possible in this case to kind of get around some of these restrictions by using the bikes use PED signal sign. Some of the designs I've seen have explored this idea. I'm not sure if it's going to be the ultimate final solution for this. We really would rather have some more flexibility in the way bike signal faces can be used. And then the last common issue has to do with spatial requirements. People look at the design and say, where do I have room in my city to make this work? It looks pretty big, and I encourage people not to look at this drawing and call it a standard drawing. The important details are really on the road side. My rule of thumb for whether or not this will work on a certain street is to say you need a parking lane. You need some space. Standard parking lane, about 8 feet. You need a standard protected bike lane, anywhere from 8 to 10 feet. Bigger is always better. And you need an ample sidewalk. And when you have all those dimensions together, that is enough room to bend your cycle track, your protected bike lane away from the intersection to provide that one car length of space. Now, even in more constrained conditions, you might be able to take advantage of the design, but you'd have to be willing to set back your pedestrian crosswalk even further. You'd have to be able to occupy some of the right-of-way and the property on the corner, and you'd have to be willing to accept a high degree of deflection from the straight path of a bicyclist in order to fit it all in there. Now, before I finish, I wanted to show a couple quick sneak peeks of U.S. concepts where cities have tried to take this seriously and started making proposals. This is a concept in Lincoln, Nebraska. Some Alta engineers have been working on this one for a while, and earlier designs involved permitted conflicts. Although that has been revised since the interim approval, we are now doing fully protected signal phases. But these corner islands are very similar to the corner refuge islands in the design. They're very deep enough to store an entire car, and starts to use some of those principles. In Portland, Oregon, they had a high right hook risk with a collision history, and they started to look at these designs as potentially one solution to solving that. This is a complicated location. It's downhill. There's high speeds. Ultimately, the design wasn't selected, but it was one of the first times I had seen a U.S. city starting to take this seriously. And then the big one really is Salt Lake City. They are in the process of designing and building over the next couple years 2 cycle tracks, and they are going all in on this protected intersection concept as one possibility for when those 2 cycle tracks, those 2 protected bike lanes cross. And they've gone through and are using the full suite of design treatments from the forward stop bar to the corner refuge island and the setback crossing. So while these designs are not implemented today, the interest in exploration makes me hopeful that we'll soon have on-the-ground examples to look to here in the United States. Thank you for your time. I look forward to questions and discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Nick. That was an excellent presentation, and we will move next to the Q&A. And I'm just going to go ahead and show my screen, and we'll get started with questions right away. We have a number of questions that came in advance, and so what I would love to do is ask Nick and Nate if they want to address any of those questions right off the bat, and then we'll move to the questions that have come in during the session.
Yeah, I guess I can take the first one. Nick and I were talking through some of the questions, and we think one of them that's a really interesting question is, what is the rule of thumb for choosing between a mixing zone and a protected signalized turn lane? How many turning vehicle bike conflicts are necessary before you go from a mixing zone to a protected turning movement? And that's somewhere where I think we need to move a little bit further. I think one of the concepts that's been floated out is actually using the cross product of bikes and turns to try to get at how many conflicts you'll have. This is another method that's used a lot for determining if a left turn arrow is needed. So you do a cross product between left turns and opposing throughs. So I think it's something that we need to move a little further on. My gut says that if you're getting, above 50, above 75 turns in the peak hour, that's starting to get a lot of right turns where you may want to look at signalization. But I think it really depends on the context of your locality, really what that threshold might be. The other thing that I think is important is speed. Volume and speed are really the two big indicators of design. If you have a lot faster roadway, I think the mixing zone is something that's not as good of a solution for that situation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's ask a question of Nick. Pretty straightforward. The truck aprons that you showed, do buses also use those?
That's a good question. I suppose they would. If you're going to design your corner so that so that you've got a really tight corner radius, it's too tight for a large vehicle, that they indeed would have to cross over it. I'm only familiar with locations where it's used specifically for freight, but that's an interesting question as to how that interacts with transit.
Okay.
And actually, while I've got that topic, there's a great APBP discussion presentation sort of archived on the APBP website, all dedicated to these truck aprons. So if you're interested, definitely look to that for your first source.
Well, great. Thank you. And speaking of trucks, one is passing by right now in the background, so sorry about that. Here's a question for you, Nick. Generally, what is the bicycle storage capacity, and how would you deal with a situation where the bikes are queuing up and perhaps there might be a blockage to bicyclists and pedestrians?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just based on sort of the geometry and the space, my estimate is that those storage areas, the stop bar area, is about twice as big as what we conventionally see when we're seeing two-stage turn boxes that are in use today on protected bike lanes. So I think the capacity is going to be at least double what we currently have for our left turns. And as far as if you reach capacity, it says it's packed with bicyclists. Bicyclists that are approaching it, not making a left turn, but approaching from the main street, they don't have to cross into that forward stop area. They can actually stay back behind the crosswalk like a regular car would. So if you're looking up ahead and it's packed, you wouldn't proceed forward because you don't want to get in anyone else's way. It may cause a problem if there's a high volume of left-turning bicyclists. And I have heard that there is an issue with that in the Montreal example that exists because it's two-way cycle tracks that converge. So every single bicyclist has to go through that one corner, and they are at capacity today. So it'll be a nice problem for us to solve when we get there.
Yes, and we've certainly seen that Copenhagen and other jurisdictions in Europe have some of these issues, and so they're addressing it, and we can learn from them as well. A question for, and Nate, thank you. In the interim, I see that you posted some responses to questions that came in after your presentation and while Nick was presenting. So was there any one of those questions that you would like to address specifically? I saw a number about shark teeth and yielding and...
Sure. Yeah, a couple of the questions, I actually was able to pull a couple extra slides. One of the questions was on two-stage turn boxes. Another one was on green infrastructure. If you wanted to, I could quickly, I have a slide on the two-stage turn boxes I could pull up and try to answer that question.
Oh, perfect. Well, let's just send it back to you then. Okay, you're on.
Great. So this is I didn't walk through this in the presentation, but this is a slide we'll typically present to explain this concept of two-stage turn boxes. And for those who aren't familiar with it, really what it's allowing someone to do is, as bicycles approach the intersection, they kind of have two ways they can turn. They can either merge in with traffic and act as a vehicle, or they can turn more like a pedestrian and do a box turn or a two-stage turn where they cross one direction, wait for the green of the intersecting street, and then go. You can mark that area. And what you see here on the left-hand side are different configurations out of the NACTO guide based on what your geometry is of the road. On the right, a couple examples in the city of Chicago, one where we have it on the sidewalk side of the bike lane, and another one where it's on the street side, shadowed by parking. The other question I got, one of them was on green infrastructure, and how do you do green infrastructure with some of these projects. I think these NCAP, these areas where we actually don't want parking near the intersection, provide opportunities to do something a little more creative. And what you see here is something we started to do. This is not a protected bike lane, but we're looking at doing something like this in our future projects. We call it an infiltration bump out, where the water actually flows into this area, and if it's a storm that doesn't have that much water, it'll just infiltrate into the ground. If there's a lot of water, there's a beehive storm inlet in that area where the water can then get into the storm sewer network.
And where is that location, did you say?
This is on Bertaux. It's our first neighborhood greenway we installed on the north side of the city. In
Chicago?
Yep.
Okay, great. Yeah, we had seen Portland seem to do a lot with that kind of treatment as well. Okay, great. Did you have other images that you wanted to show, Nate?
No, not at this time.
Okay, great.
If there's any other great questions that...
Well, it's easy to switch back and forth, and we only have a couple of minutes left, but here's a question, and love to know the answer to that. How effective are forward stop bars as an intersection treatment to reduce right hooks? Any conditions for when they shouldn't be used?
Well, so this is Nick here. Forward stop bars currently in the U.S. are used often as a bike boulevard crossing treatment, and most often at stop signs. So the right hook risk isn't quite the same. So our current experience isn't going to answer that question. But it does make you very visible, and as a bicyclist, you are occupying the spot where a right-turning motor vehicle would turn. So they're going to see you, and they hopefully are not going to turn into you while you're in that position.
Thank you for that answer. Our previous webinar on protected lanes dealt specifically with accessibility, but we do have a question dealing with accessibility here and intersections. And so would you care to address how accessibility and protected lanes work at intersections? What are the ADA considerations with protected intersections? And has any outreach been done to understand the needs and concerns of people with accessibility needs?
We haven't done any protected intersections yet, but we have started to advance the discussion of these transit islands, where I think that's a similar concept where we're actually asking pedestrians to cross that bicycle path. And I think one of the main things is really defining the space appropriately and using, vertical grades the right way, where, are you having a pedestrian cross a bicycle path, or are you having the bicycle cross the pedestrian path? And I think a lot of times at intersections, really, pedestrians should be king. So doing tricks like having maybe a slight speed hump in the bicycle path can actually help to encourage the bicyclists to slow their speed a little bit, know that they are to yield to pedestrians.
And certainly on the international scan, we saw evidence that many of the countries and the cities were changing the hierarchy so that pedestrians had priority, followed by bicyclists, transit vehicles, freight delivery, and then individual cars. So it is a new way of thinking, but a way of thinking that seems to really promote walking and bicycling. We're a bit over time. We have a lot more questions that have come up, and we'll certainly send all of those questions on to the Green Lane Project so that they can be aware of the questions that people have out in the field. This is a time of learning for everyone. But I will ask one last question here, and that is related to the green coloring for conflict zones. So is the green coloring only for conflict zones, or could that be for the entire bike lane?
That's actually a really good question, and there's been, actually, to be honest with you, there's been some differing opinions on where it should be installed. I think in my conversations with NACTO, really where we're starting to land is doing solid green, where there's no conflict, and actually dashing the green more like a crosswalk marking where there is conflict, to really convey the message that those two areas are different. So that's what, and that hasn't come out in official guidance, but in my conversations with others at NACTO, that's kind of where we're leaning.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to all the questions, but as I said, we will send those along to the Green Lane Project, and perhaps to Nathan and to Nick as well. We enjoyed your presentations. You've really given us a lot of food for thought. Thank you so much, and thank you to Martha for taking time to introduce us and set the stage here today. So we hope that you'll join us for the upcoming Green Lane webinars on October 1st and December the 3rd. And we also would encourage you, if you're seeking continuing education credits, to please send in your attendance sheets, even if you are the only person attending at the webinar today. With that, again, my name is Kit Keller, Executive Director of APBP, and I will wish everyone a great afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today, and good luck as you work on these projects in your own cities. Bye-bye.